Hi there all, this is Ian speaking. So the tibialis posterior is a very small muscle in the back of the sort of lower leg. It lies deeper in the calf muscles, and it's quite an important muscle when it comes to mediolateral stability of the ankle, and particularly in trail runners where it comes to an uneven surface, it plays a really large role in ensuring that your ankle sort of stays straight when working on these uneven surfaces. It's often overlooked little muscle, but it plays a major role in stabilizing the medial arch height, in posterior lateral stability, and also in sort of the propulsion phase of running.
Right, so here is the tibialis posterior in terms of a figure that we could see, and you'll see here that the tibialis posterior itself runs down the posterior surface of the tibia and comes down through the medial part of the ankle and inserts on the navicular bone, which is a midfoot bone. Some of it also extends down into insert onto some of the toes. Here's a posterior view quite nicely, so you'll see it comes down there, the tendon shoots medially and then goes down. So you can see with this medial direction of the tendon, as it comes down through the medial surface, you can see it would play quite an important role in terms of that medial ankle stability. And it also helps, because of that attachment on the navicular bone, it really helps to support this medial longitudinal arch. So that becomes quite important during running. So at initial foot contact, the natural angle of the system, which is in a medial direction, will result in the ankle kind of collapsing in. That is called pronation. Now, part of pronation is quite natural. We need it. It helps us absorb energy. It helps us absorb shock. But excessive pronation would lead to hypermobile foot, which would allow us or prevent us from storing enough elastic energy. So the tibialis posterior becomes quite important when looking at this elastic energy. And if you look at the tibialis posterior muscle itself, it's got quite a long muscular tendinous unit. And the muscle fascicles are actually only about 2.5 centimeters long as it goes across the lower leg there in sort of the transverse plane or the horizontal plane. And this is important because this long tendon structure is what helps the tibialis posterior have its elastic properties. So how this works is, as we make initial foot contact with the ground, the natural angle, as I said, would be to collapse in. So the tibialis posterior, the muscle itself, actually contracts and it creates a supination sort of force. But it's a negative force because it actually just decelerates the amount of pronation or medial ankle collapse that's going to take place. While that is happening, the tendon unit or muscular tendon unit as a whole actually lengthens, and this lengthening allows it to store elastic energy, which is incredibly important. As we then progress to the toe-off phase, the muscle itself continues to shorten, but its excitation actually decreases, so its activity is not as intense. However, the elastic property of the whole tendinous unit actually recoils and creates a positive supination event, which leads to a nice rigid structure so that the foot can actually toe off. So this is really, really important for a couple of reasons. One is to prevent excessive medial ankle collapse, thereby providing mediolateral stability. And the other one is to ensure that the foot or that we are able to create a rigid foot prior to push off or toe off that will allow the rest of the system to have a solid base from which to work. So this is really, really critical. And something a little bit more in depth that I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the amount of activation of the big toe in terms of the flexion of the big toe is very, very important, which I'll allude to a little bit in the exercises.
Right, hi there folks. So I'm going to take us through a tibialis posterior activation drill. So just a little recap, we said that the tibialis posterior runs from behind the tibia, comes down along the medial surface behind the medial malleolus, and then comes and attaches to the navicular bone, or tuberosity, and there are some attachments also on the proximal portions of the toes. So the main, we've spoken about the function of the tibialis posterior, so we're going to try and mimic that in these actions of these drills that we're going to use. So one of the nice ones to do is, we just call it a tibialis posterior activation. So I'm going to mimic sort of a dysfunctional tibialis posterior, or a poorly recruited one, by just sort of creating a collapsed position of this medial longitudinal arch, and also sort of a collapsed subtalar joint. And the goal now is to try and shorten this to create a better position. Very important during this drill is that the outer four toes need to be relatively relaxed. The big toe needs to be engaged with the ground, and the base of the big toe, very important, needs to be in contact with the ground. And what we're going to do is we're going to try and shorten the space here. So basically pulling this big toe complex towards the heel. So if you look closely, by doing that, I actually create a little bit of height through the arch. Now, what's very important with this drill is that you don't want to, as you're doing it, you don't want to roll your foot up like that, because that means nothing of the medial surface is engaged, and all we're doing is actually rolling onto the lateral surfaces, which increase the faulty loading of the outside of the foot, or the fifth toe. So just a little recap again. So we're just going to create a shortening of that system there. See, my other four toes are relatively relaxed, big toes engaged, and I've got a nicely engaged medial arch. So to upgrade this, or to make it a bit more challenging, we can go into the standing position, where again we look to shorten the foot, and then we can go into a single leg stance. So basically what we're doing here is we're engaging the tibialis posterior in a more functional loading capacity. You can make it a bit more challenging there. You can start to raise up onto the toes a little bit, or we can go into a squat, but all really focusing on that medial foot activation. Once you get the hang of that and you want to increase the load a little bit, you can take a very simple type of elastic band, and you're going to wrap it under the heel, around the outside and over the top, and then you're going to create a medial pulling force. And what this is mimicking is actually, it's mimicking the subtalar collapse to the medial side, collapsed medial longitudinal arch, and now we can start to work against this elastic. Same principles, big toe engaged, the other four toes relatively relaxed, and we create the shortened space. And once again, the upgrades of this is to then do this in a standing posture, trying to hold the balance, and we can add the calf raise, or we can add the squats, looking at just holding that shortened position. And yeah, that's just some ways to engage the tibialis posterior. Will help with a little bit of medial-lateral stability of the ankles, quite important in any dynamic activities. Thanks a lot.